6. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. The Battle of Armageddon yields them no results. Well, some of the power elite, such as Jared Kushner, keep on hoping for a miracle based on old information. Just how long will it last? Countries, empires, and cities are clearly defined on someone's map, but territories are moving targets, and we're one of the elite's greatest assets. The marathon secret meetings of last week left militaries, Nazis, bankers, and power elite all waiting for something. Find out what it was in today's report. Well, it is the 30th of March. Almost spring. At least I think it's going to be almost spring here in the Northeast, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. Looks like the weather's changing around here, and that's pretty cool, finally, at least for the moment. Okay, so lots going on this week. I know that I'm a couple days late on the report, so I apologize for that. But there has been a tremendous amount going on. Remember, we are still kind of in the equinox time, even though the equinox is was about 10 days ago. It still lasts and lingers on for about 30 days before and 30 days after the actual equinox, with the week before and the week after being the most critical time, I guess you would say, for the order in the deep state. For us, there have been some changes to equinox time. Many, many changes this week, but one in particular I wanted to mention to you. So we know in the past, I've discussed on this report about the central sun of Earth and its importance, as well as your central sun and its importance to your person. During equinox time, it was a time where there was equal darkness, so to speak, and equal light. This week, we kind of discovered a little bit more about why that actually is. The artificial central sun that was in the western part or underneath the western part of the United States would overshadow the source-given central sun of Earth, and also to some degree your central sun. This is what we would call an eclipse of the central sun, or in the case of Homo sapiens, you could call it an eclipse of the heart. The reason why this occurs is because source has there's a direct line, so to speak, through the northern hemisphere that occurs in the same area of the United States as the artificial sun. In the past, the artificial central sun, or the central sun of the machine, would actually receive most of the source energy and essence and source life force in totality. This year is a little bit different because the central sun of Earth actually started to receive all of that energy. This actually also relates to the deep state in a lot of ways, and those that were in positions of power, as their central sun was the artificial central sun of the machine. And in this case, those that were in power would actually have received a lot of energy directly to them. And there were many people that were expecting that to happen over the course of the last week, since last weekend. This did not happen, and their format, to quote their words, did not change. The energy bypassed them in totality and went directly to your central sun and the central sun of Earth, which should have actually given you a little bit of a boost. Not to say there are not other mechanisms that were in place that might have caused you an issue, but overall, this will be the first time in a very long time during an equinox period that you and Earth herself actually received source life force. during an equinox, or the equinox time. Now, the time of the eclipse would normally last until this past weekend. Then the eclipse would have passed. So the total eclipse actually being on the equinox itself, and it would take 7 days before and 7 days after, approximately 2 weeks, for this period to completely and totally begin and then pass. So we are now officially past that time, but not without a big battle on our hands. So I'm glad to say that, today things were a little bit calmer. They're still pushing on, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East and in other areas of the world right now. But it's not as bad on an energetic level as it has been for the last week. At least not as bad today, or at least not as of this morning, I guess. Okay, let's talk about their artificial battle of Armageddon a little bit more. We touched on it in the last report, but we can give you a little bit more information because it's kind of changing now a little bit. So this Battle of Armageddon, for the most part this last week, there were 3 people that were at the helm, and towards the end of this past week, we were down to 1. That one, was none other than Jared Kushner. Mr. Kushner was expecting a large influx of energy this past week, which he did not actually receive, and no later than the 28th. He was expecting to receive this. Now, things didn't quite go the way that Mr. Kushner wanted, and let's just say I'll talk about that a little bit more in this report. But he was expecting a new position for himself, as were many people this last weekend. Sorry, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. They were all expecting to get their boost beginning over last weekend, and that was supposed to continue until this past weekend. And during this time, they were expecting to be appointed to varying positions. Now, Kushner might have told a little bit of a fib here and there, and so did the other 2, and they're no longer here. But he might have told a few fibs and said that he actually did get this position, which was a lie. This is part of the reason why the war is continuing in the Middle East, and why, today, over the last couple of days, I should say, 2 in particular, they might have figured out he didn't get that position, and they might have figured out that they better get a bang for their buck in the Middle East. Therefore, things are changing. So the intended Great Reset that they had planned for this Armageddon period, or after this Armageddon period, did not actually happen. There was no machine assist to continue on with the process. Now, you've heard a lot about Great Resets. There are many different versions on the internet. There is the version where it's in a negative context and it's being promoted by folks such as the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and others, where it involves things like cryptocurrency, central bank cryptocurrency, Agenda 2030, originally Agenda 2020, and several other agendas that involve new strains of COVID, which we're hearing about now across 25 states in the U.S., so on and so forth, that there's a cicada version. Apparently now. They have been promoting and pushing this cicada version. Now, interestingly enough, I did talk about, I think it was maybe about a year and a half ago, about cicadas somewhat. The cicada is a group of people that are recruited as young children that go to a school in Japan specifically. During their time in that school, they're selected to enter into different programs. Some of those people become computer hackers. Some of them join CyberLife, which is a terrorist organization against Homo sapiens and against Earth itself, some believe they're on the quote-unquote good side, and others believe they're on the bad side. But that's because they join the cicada group at a very young age, and they're told they're doing good things. Therefore, they believe right is wrong and wrong is right. So their view of things is a little bit skewed. The cicada group also has nuclear scientists, all kinds of political programs, in which then the cicadas, as they quote-unquote graduate from said school as a young adult, they then go in and infiltrate governments worldwide, scientific organizations like Harvard University, MIT University, other prevalent schools for science, political science, and other fields. And then they go on from there to work for agencies like the CIA, global headquarters in the UK. They have infiltrated every government everywhere, and they can be called upon at any time to report back to their reported headquarters. They are kind of like the male and female version of China's Black Widow program. Russia has a Sparrow program, but there is nothing more advanced and non-denominational, no nationality group such as the cicadas. No, so it's very interesting to me that the new version of COVID that's out there is being called the cicada virus or the cicada strain of COVID. More than likely, the cicadas are probably involved. They are far more advanced than any MK Ultra program. They are far more advanced than any Monarch program you've ever heard about on the internet, or any of the CIA's programs like Project Nightingale and all of the other ones that we read about on the internet. So that is who the cicadas are, and very interesting about the release of this virus. So all of these are different aspects of the Great Reset that has been promoted very heavily and negatively around the alternative media and the internet. Now, on the other hand, there are other types of resets that are more positively fed to you. Some of those would be the global currency reset that has been in the works now for almost 2 decades and never pays out. Nasara Jasara, which has been in the works allegedly for much longer. And neither of them are actually, telling you the truth. The Great Reset is kind of more like that famous guy with the boat. You know, the famous guy with the boat, the 2x2, the Great Flood, Noah's Ark. That's the famous guy with the boat I'm talking about. So a great reset in the mind of the elite, the actual real elite, and a machine on this planet, is where they wipe out all of humanity, start over with the next version of Homo sapiens on this planet. We achieve... I hate to say achieve. We have reached a point as a civilization, meaning our Homo sapien species, to where we are waking up. We are far too awake. There are many people trying to reconnect with Source or connect with Source. We are receiving wisdom, and they can't seem to stop it. The kingdom of Source begins to grow on this planet because of the work of all of you. We are educating one another. People are starting to realize something is wrong. Things are changing too rapidly, and this happens every 2000 to 2016 years on this planet. Therefore, the Great Reset is the next possible option for the elite to maintain control of us cattle, as they call us. So, that being said, The reason why they put out different versions of the Great Reset online is because they are looking for your implied consent. Whether you favor the positive one or you watch lots and lots of videos about the negative Great Reset, and therefore the implied consent there is you watch, you fear it, so you're giving away your power through fear. And in addition to that, you do nothing about it. Not like there's anything you could really do about it, but once you know and you do nothing, that is implied consent. So you are consenting to what they're about to do to you based on the fact that you are doing nothing. They say willful ignorance is a crime, and this is kind of where they get you on a technicality. Now, this isn't anything negative towards all of you listening to this in any way, shape, or form, because there's really nothing you can do, and they know it. But they put this information out there, both positively and negatively, so they can get the majority of the people to follow along and to do nothing but sit there and wait for the positive thing to happen. Well, the others are just looking for signs anywhere and everywhere that the negative could possibly be happening. Meanwhile, the Great Reset isn't either. Now, their machine god, because there's an artificial god that they worship, their machine god has determined that the next Great Reset would not end in a flood. No Noah, no guy with the cute animals, no boat, no ark, no days of rain, and all of these types of things, although we've kind of experienced a little bit of that too. They were expecting full-on fire and brimstone to actually happen, and where we would all die. So there's no those that follow Source would be saved and all of these types of things in their scenario, because if they had their way, Source would not be here at all. Now, they are also counting on the fact there's still enough people that are blind to actual Source itself, or the actual real God. And therefore, no one would try to reach out at a time of an exodus. The rest of the people in the world who follow varying religions would believe that they would be saved because they have followed diligently. Therefore, they're hoping for things like the end times, because in most of those books, the end times ends well. Christ comes back, Yeshua, depending on which version of which book that you follow, there is a positive force that comes into the universe, if for those that meditate, and all will be right with the world. Well, didn't happen. We didn't have any fire and brimstone, no flood, no end of the world being permitted by Source itself, but you could say we did begin to experience a little bit of a flood, but it wasn't water. At least not the kind they were looking for. I will talk about that in a little bit, because I have some things to explain to you so it kind of all makes sense. So their fire and brimstone is actually computer-generated images, just like the flood was a computer-generated image in a computer-generated world. So when you think of computer-generated images and holograms, we think of the movies that we've seen or the things that we see on the internet, where they might take a real person and then they make a funny meme or a commercial with that person. But in real life, there's no one actually standing there. They just take it and they move the lips around in a different way, and before you know it, there's a president of some country singing the hokey pokey. But that's actually not what an actual true artificial intelligence generated image is in a matrix type world. It's actually just as real as you and I. You can touch it, you can put your arm around it, If it's a missile that is artificially generated, then it's a real missile and it really goes boom and it really hits the ground and it really kills people. So these are very serious things in an artificial reality if they are able to come to fruition. On the flip side, because of all the changes that are happening, people are beginning to see things that are there disappearing, and things that were not there actually appearing. It's happening in a trickle because the computer is trying to generate something that wasn't originally there and trying to change our world, and it's not working as well as it did for the deep state and those that had even minimal access to control our world artificially. So normally what would happen is they would then appoint one of their own to be the false savior. Someone would step in and play the role of the Antichrist, and someone would step in and play the role of the Savior or the next Messiah, Yeshua, Christ, something that would appease most of the people. And then they would rid the world of all the badness, and large change would take place. So the 10 days of darkness and all of these types of things, and then sometimes it's 3 days of darkness and, so on and so forth. All of these things normally take place during these eclipse type periods of time. And I'm saying eclipse. I did not mean to say equinox. Now you understand the meaning of an actual eclipse, at least as it relates to the power elite on this planet, whatever's left of them at this point. In their case, typically what would happen after that, no one would actually be saved. They would be led to the slaughter by someone they believed was a good source being there to help them. They would rid the world of as much organic life as possible, hence the flood with the salt water and the oceans rise. In this case, it was supposed to be fire and brimstone, and there would be a short period of time of darkness simply because there would be no influence from source. Because remember, as Homo sapiens, even the ones that are not so good, maybe not the deep state folk, but even the humans on this planet that might not always be, or Homo sapiens that might not always be the quote-unquote best versions of ourselves, we still anchor source on this planet. So in this case, for the power elite, or whatever's left of them these days, the false savior was supposed to be a new form of a government, a new world government at the end of the day, after the false savior program, end times, whatever humans were, or Homo sapiens were retained here, plus whatever animals were left that did not burn in fire, were supposed to be now thankful and grateful to the new government who saved you. Most likely this new government would be headed by insert savior person here. In this case, everybody. There were three main players in this particular case that were bidding for the savior position. Kushner was one of those three. The other two you wouldn't know even if I told you their name. So at the top of this council, as always was behind the scenes, there are 12 folk and a machine on the Black Sun side, and a council of 12 Illuminati members. Now, since most of those seats are currently vacant, there were a whole group of people that were expecting to take those seats, and apparently there is a physical change that happens to an individual that obtains those permissions and those seats. Now, both sides had left, at least over the last several years, one particular 13th party. That 13th party would have always been a progenitor, an essence being, someone on the level of Lucerne, Lucifer, Lucerne, same being. Or it could have been someone like Daniel, which I've mentioned to you before, a lesser known essence being that only appears in the book of Enoch. There are also some others that participated. You all know Michael, you know Gabriel, you know Raphael. And these essence beings were always the 13th of each group. They were the handler, so to speak, of each group. And if you don't know what a handler is someone that an agency typically appoints to a person or a group of people to get them to do what said agency wants them to do. Oftentimes, that is a person that the group or target or mark eventually learns to trust and believes what they are saying to be true, and therefore acts accordingly to said agency's will, said group's will. In this particular case, handlers went all the way up the food chain. And these types of beings were the handlers for both groups. So on the one hand, they knew they didn't have a 13th anymore. So there was definitely 3 people that were looking forward to taking a position of that party. None of the 3 actually got any such position, but so much so, they actually planted their energetic signature into the machine. Therefore, all of their energy would go into the machine because the machine told them this is what they have to do to be that person. They were told during the time of the equinox that when they would know that they received this position because, and all its permissions that went along with that position, because all of the energy would flow through them and then eventually to the machine. That didn't happen for anybody. No, sorry to say, didn't quite work out. Now, this actually is what they were waiting for in this meeting last weekend, the weekend before this one that just passed. They were all sitting around expecting something to happen where they would know, because the next tier down was also expecting something. Whether that's a third-party energy flow or some kind of a signature, an essence signature that they would recognize with a special machine that would tell them that this person received the new permission and the new position. Now, they obviously sat around last weekend for quite a long time and nothing actually happened. They continued waiting for some days after that, and, you know, Kushner and the other 2 did also, waiting for their positions, and they figured by the 28th of March that this was definitely going to happen. So much so that last week they said that there were going to be peace negotiations with Iran, blah, 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 and that these peace talks would take 5 days to achieve peace. Funny, they knew exactly 5 days. Almost sounds like a movie script, doesn't it? 5 days exactly. How do you know it's going to last 5 days? We don't know anything that's going to last 5 days. Rain lasts 5 days. You know, we can guess. But they knew exactly how long it was supposed to last because they figured, and Jared Kushner figured, that he would have that position definitely within 5 days. And then they didn't need the war anymore. They didn't need the fake Armageddon. They didn't need any of that. So their fight between the fake good and the fake evil continued on for a few more days until this past weekend when, well, things changed again. They did not get the positions. They got very angry, and they tried to figure out why they didn't get the positions. It's going to be one of those days or one of those reports where it's hard to talk. They were trying to figure out why they didn't get the position. So they took their little handy-dandy machine, and they tried to figure out who had what they thought this should look like. Well, apparently they thought that person was me. Now, I'm not a 13th person of any Illuminati or any of these groups or any of those people. However, apparently I had the signature that they were looking for, which I did, because I've been taking all of the other permissions and signing covenant after covenant after covenant, and with Essence, with Source, not with those people. So apparently they decided bright and early or very late on Saturday that the Battle of Armageddon should be against me. So, and so it was. Apparently they tried to steal my permissions because they thought they should have it. You know, it's almost like the Willy Wonka movie and the Veruca Salt or whatever it was. You know, that kind of looked like Kushner over the weekend. He was a little crazy. He was like, I want it now. And he was giving all these orders to all these military people and global headquarters and all kinds of people to try to steal my permissions. But remember, as I said to all of you, my permissions aren't always my permissions. I put them all kinds of places and only take them out randomly, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for hours, sometimes not at all in a day. And it's just sometimes I need this one, sometimes I need that one, and they're all hidden away. And I just happened to be caught, apparently, at a time that I was using one of them. So they decided these are the things that they want. Well, didn't work out. As soon as we figured out what was happening, the permissions went away, and they went into their safekeeping place with the safekeeping party and far, far away from here. And, well, I didn't really get anything. Didn't mean it wasn't any. I don't know why they do these things at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, but they do. So doesn't mean it wasn't a difficult Saturday and a difficult Sunday here, which is why this report is a little bit late. So as far as the deep state is concerned, that's kind of where we're at with the war, but now it's sort of morphed a little bit. I think they've kind of come to the conclusion that they did not get any positions. Now they're looking for money and resources. In this particular case, we're back to USSR strategy number whatever it is. They feel that at the very least they should get some money for doing what they've done. They realize they didn't actually achieve their Great Reset. They are still planning on trying a Great Reset if they have anything to do it with. They are not giving up on their war, and they don't even understand the war that they're fighting. But they are going to continue now with the pipeline war. So in the past, this is going back a few years ago now, I told you that Kushner and Ivanka made a deal with Israel to flow pipelines from Iran and from Saudi Arabia. It was Saudi Arabia at the time. All of the oil from that country through Jordan and out to Israel. And then Israel would become the power broker for all of the oil in the Middle East. Apparently, they're expanding those plans to Iraq and to other countries. The deals were always the same and always have been the same. And I'm going to explain more about this in a little bit. Where the country would get, say, X amount or percentage. The Illuminati would get Y amount of the profits. The power broker would get a certain amount. And the Black Sun would get say Z amount. Now, these amounts could vary depending on the deal, but the one thing that they would have to do is they would have to, under the old rules of war. Now, at the highest levels on this planet that are no longer with us, they understood the rules of war. Those rules would always include 21% to those that were born organically and of source. Now, they may have twisted and turned that 21% in varying different ways. In other words, in the form of retirement pay, pensions, jobs for people such as yourself, actual Homo sapiens. They would do, quote unquote, humanitarian efforts in particular regions where they stole all of the resources and gained what's called territories. They would have to do that. Now, those at the highest level understood the rules of the real war on the planet. It doesn't matter what country you think is against what country. It doesn't matter which territory or lands that the war allegedly occurs on. It doesn't make a difference. Those wars occur inside territories, which occur inside kingdoms, which occur inside empires. Empires are managed by one group, which are then handled by another person that truly understands the war and understands the rules. These yahoos that are left have no clue what I'm talking about right now. There might be a few Rothschilds that know to some degree what they're supposed to do, or people on that level, but they don't really understand why they have to do it. They think they can pick anybody to take any percentage at any given moment in time, but that wasn't actually the case. And little Cushy Cush over there, Mr. Kushner, made all kinds of promises that he could never deliver on, even if they achieved this objective. The same will actually happen to the U.S. group that's running around making similar promises for big money for pipelines running from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, all flowing through Israel, and the deals they made with Israel, because it is not possible under the rules of war. So 21% was always supposed to go to those that are of source, on the quote-unquote source side. 69% was supposed to go to the Illuminati group. It doesn't matter what territory you're in. It doesn't matter what kingdom you're in. It doesn't matter what land area you are in. At that time, you are in their empire. Period. End of story. And so therefore, they were due 69% of all the proceeds. Doesn't matter what country you're negotiating with, what people you're, how many residents you're dealing with. That is how it was supposed to go. The Black Sun would actually get 10%. That's why they're known as the 10%ers. The 10%ers are the ones that run Customs and Border Patrol in every single country, also known as the CIA. The 10%ers also run all of your militaries. The 10%ers are the ones that actually fight the war. The 10%ers aren't necessarily actual militaries either. The 10%ers could also be folks like Hitler. For doing his job, 10%. Now, he would have to share that 10% amongst his army, in this case called the brown shirts. Did the hierarchy, the generals and those types of things get more of the 10%? Yes. Occasionally, under times of global martial law, which is still low level, that percentage could change in accordance with territories that are necessary. So in other words, under certain circumstances, when agreed upon between the Illuminati group of 12 and the Black Sun group of 12, the percentages could vary, but still never ever to exceed 79%. Never to exceed 79%. Now, these people have been running around the planet trying to get more than 79%. In fact, during my tenure in Durango, they believed they were entitled to an additional 7% based on the fact that I was there and based on the fact they believed that I agreed, because of the Jesper Kingdom of Mana thing, that I agreed to give an additional 7% to them. That is completely and totally incorrect. They thought they might have taken an additional 7% of the kingdom part of source. This is 21%. So they thought they got a third of it. Why? Because implied consent comes into play. You see, everything in this world runs on implied consent. However, in the case of myself, that is not the case. Any covenants or agreements have to actually be agreed upon. Just like when they moved up to the higher level, and the Illuminati 12 were there, and the Black Sun 12 were there, agreements and covenants would have a retina scan that was involved. It's not the retina that they're actually scanning. They're actually scanning their essence, and the agreements are actually signed in essence. Essence can also be used to verify a person's identity, but it's not the same on that level. So all of the deals that basically they're making throughout the Middle East right now, all of the ones they made with Iraqi intelligence, I know about all of them. I know about the ones they made with the Pakistani intelligence. I know about the ones with the Iranians. I know about the ones with the Russians and the North Koreans for their donations of free weapons. The same with China. And I understand that you had a guy that thought very highly of himself. Matter of fact, the intelligence community was even calling him, quote unquote, Mr. Wonderful. That's Jared Kushner. Not so wonderful now these days, and a lot of disappointment over the last several days for sure. But these deals that they're making, unlike others that were made when those groups were around and their handlers were around, you know, kind of reminds me of what happened with the Transneft pipeline. You see, the Council of 12 plus the 13th on the Black Sun side built the pipelines. Other companies that would have participated in the building of ports and other things would be like Halliburton, and infrastructure would be built, pipelines would be built, all of those types of things around the world after the quote-unquote war ends. The deal would be cut within the rules of war guidelines. The pipelines would be built because money would actually have come out of the system for this when they had access prior to 2007. And then there's your pipeline. The split would go according to the numbers or some close variation there too that I just told you, with 21% being held back by those that knew better, even if they held it in safekeeping and never actually dispersed it by those that know the rules of war, because if they break the rules of war, all bets are off. The rules of war were enforced and put in place by Source itself. These were covenants that were signed with people that were much higher than those trying to actually do this thing right now. They were signed in essence a long time ago, each one carrying their own permissions. And that's how it is done on this level. Therefore, they are responsible to ensure that the rules are followed. This is one of many rules of war, by the way. And we're going to talk about the war here in a few. But just so you understand, even the old deals that were made with a certain percentage, for example, to the country of Russia, a certain percentage to the Illuminati, a certain percentage to the Order of the Black Sun, and a certain percentage to a little group we call the KGB. So these are the ways that it would normally have worked. Now, on lower levels, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience with implied consent and with consents. So we know about the higher levels of the Illuminati. What about the dynasty families? What about some of the lower levels of the Illuminati? What about some of the lower levels of the families on the Order of the Black Sun side? You know, people like the Jesuits, the Tables, the cartels, the mafias, the other organizations that all work under this umbrella, Freemasons and otherwise. Depending on which side of the table you're on is which downline you're involved in. But there are varying levels to either group and either side. Now, that was kind of part of the selection process they thought that they would make up amongst themselves over the course of last weekend, because they establish a numbering system on both sides. So if you are number 372 in line for a particular position, then you have a long way to go. How do they establish this? Is it based on your essence? Is it based on the amount of your terrible deeds you did to the rest of Source in all of its creations? I don't know. But there are people that are in the higher levels for varying positions in the Illuminati in line. You know, it's kind of like being at a deli, you know, where you pick a certain number and you cringe when your number is 100 and something and they're only on number 2. Well, these people, you know, people die, people fall out of the ranks, people elect not to participate at some point in time. They can actually remain neutral within the families, take different positions, different jobs, that they don't find this position something they want. So there are different reasons why people move up and down in the ranks. In this particular case, the ones that were at the top picks, were all the ones that were expecting to have positions over this last weekend. And I guess that's what they were waiting for. And I have to laugh because nothing actually happened. But I need to tell you a little bit of a story of something that has occurred in my world. I'm dropping notes and papers everywhere here. Okay. I know I told you a little bit about stories in my travels to Russia in the past, and that's not the only place I've been. I've been many different places, but, you know, at the same time, I also traveled to several other different countries in this one particular trip, and there were many, many trips. So I'm going to tell you about this because it's relevant to this order and Illuminati and position taking and all of these types of things. So, in 2010, before I had left for this trip, I was introduced to a lady, probably 6 months before, by the name of Sharon Thorne Rodcheron Nystrom. At the time, this woman was about 71 years old-ish. She claimed to me that she was the trustee for the entire trust. So for me, you know, Kim not knowing any better at the time, I thought, well, this is interesting. And at the time, I didn't understand that the Treasury was not part of the United States government. I knew that there was a corporate Treasury, but I believed that there was a difference between the Treasury of USA and the U.S. Treasury. because that is what the internet told me, and that's what people told me, which was completely untrue, by the way. This whole story that you're hearing about getting rid of the corporate government is a lie. That is not even a thing. Without corporations and corporates, there would be no governments at all, anywhere, at all. Okay, so she tells me this story. So over the course of time, we agreed that we were going to meet in Switzerland, and we were going to flip the system. And what I mean by flip the system, meaning we were going to turn it on. She was going to get paid a certain percentage. She had claimed that she had done these things before and never gotten paid. And I assured her I was not that person, which I'm not. So off we went. I went to Switzerland, and I was still trying to help her get a visa. It became apparent she had something called a Class C block on her passport, which did not permit her to travel to Switzerland. Why? Because they did not want her to access the system. That kind of made sense. Makes a whole lot more sense now. Because when she was younger, so eventually I had to try to find a place. Let me continue on with this. I had to find a place where I could do this tripping of the system. Switzerland was not the only place in the world that could be done, where she did not require a visa. Therefore, the block would not exist in this particular place. So looking around, I decided that she did not need, I didn't decide, I found out she did not need a visa to go to several places, one of them being Russia. Being a Thailand passport holder. I'm saying it in this way for a reason. So this is actually the case. I have a copy of her passport. If you want me to post it in our community chat, I can do that. So I agreed to meet her in Russia. I flew her to Russia on my money, which I actually had at the time before I went on this, at the beginning of this trip. I ended up very broke by the end of the trip, which was intentional, I'm sure. So I flew her to Russia, and she met with two associates of mine who she didn't like very much, allegedly, and was crying the poor me's and wanting me to come. I ended up having to make a decision on whether or not to go home, as this was the 24th of December. To going home and spending Christmas with my child, or trying to continue on to finish this, or do I leave the 71-year-old woman alone in a country that she's never been to before with a bunch of people she doesn't know? So I talked to my daughter, and I decided to continue on. So I arrived in Russia, and she was not in her room. Kept knocking on the door. She wasn't there. So I decided to get some sleep because it was kind of late by the time that I got through Christmas Eve traffic. And wait to see what happens. So by morning, I get a phone call from the front desk saying I have a visitor and they'd like me to come down to the lobby. And I said, well, who is it? Here I am running around by myself. Who is it? Well, it's Nikolai. He's with the Russian government. He's asking you to come down and meet with him. I thought, oh, great. Here goes my visa or something. So I go down to the lobby. I meet with this guy. He tells me a little bit about who he is. He said he knows where she is. He asked me questions to find out who I was and what I knew. And they decided that they wanted to work with me. I'm like, oh, okay. After the Russian Inquisition. So eventually later on that evening, I did meet her in person, and she's told me a lot of stories over the course of the few months that I was actually there. And one of the stories that she told me, she wasn't a very nice person, by the way, and she was hell-bent and determined to actually get paid this time. So she told me that she, when she was very young, went to college in Europe, or university as she called it, in Europe. She said that she was offered all kinds of things, including varying positions. They told her they would pay for her college and that she would never have anything to worry about. They told her she would have great power and all of these things if she would just give them consent regarding her position. They told her that she was the key holder, she was all of these things at that time, and she believed them. And she believed that they were actually going to follow through and do all of the things that they said they would do, which, well, they did a few things to keep the carrot dangling. Did they ever give her personally any money? No, they did not. But they did, help her pay for college or things like that. But they would not give her the money. They would pay the college, as an example. So this went on for quite some time. They gave her a job eventually in Japan. And they would continue to ask her for permissions and consent. And these were fairly big name people. They were people like, at the time, Khomeini. She told me about long conversations that she had with Khomeini, which was the predecessor to Khomeini, who actually just passed away. Well, at least officially anyway. So she told me about all these different people that she had met. She had pictures of her with all of these people. And they all got what they wanted from her. And this is in her words. But she never got any part of what they promised her. At least a few dangling carrots here and there maybe. But they never really gave her anything. So this time she was hell-bent and determined to get hers. So they took her, I was by her side for the most part. They took her, told me they needed to take her to the Central Bank of Russia in order to make this happen. They had then determined that they needed something called a remote terminal because they did not have one in Russia. So I was to call my friend, which I did do. I call him my ghost friend. My ghost friend worked with everyone and for no one at the same time. He was a guy that I still, on occasion, talk to. He's an American. And he's kind of out of things now. But I knew I could call him and he could get me a remote terminal from the Pentagon. So I received the remote terminal. I personally didn't. The Russians actually took it. But the remote terminal arrives a couple of days later with a few caveats. The cost of this, to rent this remote terminal, was $8 million a year by the Russian government, which they never actually paid. And they needed to take her, they needed to install it in the central bank, which took a couple days, allegedly. And they needed to take her to the central bank and have her put her permission into the terminal, which eventually they did. They tried to do it without her. They tried to steal it. They tried to go around her, do all kinds of things. But eventually they actually had to take her there. And they did a few times, actually. So along the way, they asked her for varying things. Shortly after they, or the rest of them, found out what we were doing, there were many other people that showed up at that time. People from the Federal Reserve, people from a guy by the name of Michael from the Federal Reserve, and a guy by the name of Philip Love, a general from a different country. There were American generals that showed up as well. There were also people from Indonesia that showed up and other countries around the world. People from Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, UBS Bank, Bank of America, all kinds of Wells Fargo. Everybody showed up with their hand out wanting money. They told me the people from Credit Suisse were the nicest of all the people, and they never let me meet them. But eventually I found out where they were staying, and they were staying at a hotel in Moscow called the Golden Ring Hotel. Don't know if it's still there. Haven't looked. But at the time, that was the name of the hotel. So all of these negotiations were going on with a handler named Nikolai. So back and forth to the central bank she went, giving varying permissions, and they took every single one of them and tried to open a portal, and it didn't work. At the time, they were trying to open a portal to the Alpha system. So they had to come up with a story collectively, and they did. A phone call comes eventually to myself from my ghosty friend, and they said, congratulations. Calls me up and he says, congratulations. I said, congratulations for what? He said, you have been appointed the new trustee, but your position will have veto vote. And I went, really? Okay, and that you are now going to have access to the money, and you have an override over the Illuminati. In other words, you can tell them what they can have and what they can't have. Now, I didn't really know much about alpha systems or anything else at that time, but I started to learn very quickly, and a lot of the things that happen, I found out were consent or implied consent. So I now was expecting the Russian government people to come and tell me this very same thing, which they did. They first asked me if I wanted to take the position. Well, yes, I want to take the position. I can do great humanitarian work with all of this money. They didn't tell me about anything about splitting or, I remembered the stories she had told me of what happened to her. And I'm like, I wonder if I'm going to get paid for doing this job. Didn't know anything about the 21% rule or anything of that nature. So they tried repeatedly to use my consent and her consent to open up the system. And it didn't work. Why? Because I am not that person. Turns out, many years later, I found out that there was a portal system or a port system in which she actually controlled between the Alpha and Omega system. So even if someone gave permission via Alpha, at the time, the way things worked, you needed the portal control system for both the Black Empire, White Empire, Red Empire. She had them all, and the Yellow Empire. So even though she had given permissions in the past and they had stolen her essence via this eye scan that they did to her, they had actually placed her essence in a silver ball, and they tried to use her essence in the past. They couldn't fully use it unless they kept asking her permission. Because you see, the signature still had to be there with the permission being given at that time under the old rules of things. She actually knew she needed me. She mentioned it a few times. She called me even after taking thousands and thousands of dollars in my savings from me. But she actually called me repeatedly for about 3 years, asking me to help her. And I said no. Nope. I would answer, I would listen to her, and I said no. Because no permissions are given from me. See, she needed me to open the Alpha system, and she figured that out. Either that or the Russians told her. My understanding was she ended up going back home to Thailand, and I don't know what happened to her after that. I know she did go to Hong Kong and tried to do things on her own again because she called me from there. I know she also went to China and tried to do things again, and I wouldn't give no permission. So eventually she kind of stopped calling me because I think she figured out she was never going to get what she wanted. But the point is, even on an Illuminati level, which is what she was an Illuminati bloodline family member, she still had to give the permission in addition to the essence, even on that level. Now, I have never been on any of those levels. I am on a higher level than they were. And I was more on their handler section level, but not involved on that side of the war. So I was always on the source side. I was never on their side. However, that doesn't mean they still tried to do things constantly when I was in Durango. Constantly the Russians did. Constantly this happened over and over and over again. Now, during the time between 2010 and the time that I actually went back to Russia, which was in 2015, Putin tried to do the same thing. He tried to take my essence, which they did take while I was there, and they tried to use it to use my permissions. That did not work. That's number one. Number two, there was absolutely no trustee position at any moment, unbeknownst to me at that time, that I ever got or was awarded by any council anywhere. This was all a lie. Therefore, a lot of decisions I made from that point until I figured this out many years later were based on me consenting based on a lie, which is why no matter how many times they stole from me in order to gain permissions, it didn't fully work. 9 years in Durango, over and over and over again. Still recently in Scranton, Pennsylvania, they tried to get me to consent to a meeting, which means I will work with them, which means they have the right to take my essence. I mean, I know the games and I know the tricks now. All I said to them is I have questions. I would like to ask questions. I have questions. That's all I said. I didn't consent to working with anybody. I didn't consent to anything. And they're still so angry about that because they don't understand why I won't just give it to them. I can't give it to you. Not only that, the rules have changed. Did they ever follow through with their side of things? No. Did they even understand they had to? At one point they did. When Daniel was around and Lucerne was around and all these people were around, they did know. But they always did a workaround in some kind of gray area and allegedly held the 21% and all of these things, but that's not the way that it's supposed to work. You make a deal, the deal's signed with the essence. That's part of the reason why, if you've been on, let's just say, the higher end of banking, then you understand that all Fed terminals have a retina scan. All of the suitcases that are given to all the dynasty families have a retina scan. All of the ones from the Vatican have a retina scan. Everything has a retina scan, even down to the banker level. When you are a level 6 banker or above, sometimes even a level 3, you sign in with a retina scan. That is your essence consent. And for the people that are doing this, that are regular Homo sapiens, you are giving up more than you could possibly imagine to these people. Same thing with the NSA people, DARPA people, and other people that sign in with a retina scan. You are giving these people more than you could possibly imagine. Now, most of these family members would be glad to give all of this up because they give no regard to source and everything goes to the machine. And they're fine with that. They would rather have a machine than have source, as they have agreed in one way or another to accept their position against source in the war, whether they know that's what they actually did or not. So the same thing that Putin tried to do, Putin was also taking a part in trying to use my essence to fire up the old Babylon system. That didn't work. He also went around the planet making a whole bunch of deals he knew nothing about, with percentages that he was actually guided to do. So at least he followed the rules, but the rules they didn't follow was there is no such thing as implied consent, not on this level. And even the consent that they received from Miss Nystrom does not work on my level. No matter how many times they've tried, it still doesn't work. Is it uncomfortable for me when they do it? Yes. Do I know they're doing it? Yes. Do I have to track down machines that they use to do it? Yes. Every time I track down a machine. But there's a reason why they used to regenerate constantly. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So I want to talk a little bit about war, because it's kind of relevant to what's happening to you now and the changes that are happening now, which are things that you need to understand, or I need to give you this information so you can act accordingly. So today we've talked a lot about implied consent and the different ways that they can get implied consent from you. So be careful, because things are changing. And as we enter into the kingdom of source, implied consent is something you have to be very aware of. We have gone back and forth over the last 2 weeks between realities that are flickering back and forth as we go into a war. That's why things feel so strange. Time feels off a lot. People are experiencing, what seems to be either memory lapses sometimes, also feelings of elation, feeling that everything is right. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like being in the eye of a storm of a hurricane and things flip back and forth and back and forth. It's because we are at war. And it's not a war with these people. We're at war with what's left on this level. And that's machines. Always machines. Is the deep state trying to do their part? Sure. They just don't know what they're doing. I'm not saying that implies that they need to be forgiven in any way, shape, or form, but we definitely gave them the benefit of the doubt recently. So we'll continue on. First, I need to talk to you about the war, though, so you understand where we're at, and then how far we've come most recently. So this war has been going on for a really, really, really long time. Source laid down the law of the rules of war for those that were on the higher level. Those are covenants. They are written in essence. There is no backing out of a covenant with Source. The rules are very clear to those of us on the level in which we play the war. Illuminatis, dynasty families, deep state members, militaries, and otherwise are irrelevant. But groups on this level pass down information to both the Illuminati and to the Order of the Black Sun, Councils of 12, and on down the road to people on a lower level, so that they have books called the Rules of War or the Rules of Engagement. They're actual books. They have the do's and don'ts on the lower level of things that they can and cannot do when trying to take territories, when trying to take over Earth herself, when trying to manipulate realities, things that they can and cannot do in the rules of war. Now, they know very little by the time you get down to a military level or an intelligence agency level. Some agencies, like the CIA, probably had very little, if at all, communications with any council on either side. I know that a lot of them wanted to talk to them. There were people that tried to get me to introduce them to these people when I didn't even know these people. These people know me, but I didn't know those people. So the rules of war on a lower level are, in short, partial and only relevant and compartmentalized so that they will do their function. When you get even further down in military, such as colonel level, lieutenant level, officer level, all those types of levels, they get very little, even littler information. Most of those people on the further level down are not involved in any of these rituals to become a general. They're not involved with the higher levels and higher ranks. They don't really understand what they're doing. All they know is they want to fight for their country, or by conscription, they're forced to fight or at least participate for a minimum of a year in specific countries around the world that require conscription or have conscription rules. They are given an objective. Objective could be, this is on even a higher level, a coup, an overthrowing of a president, head of state, prime minister, king, or otherwise, which happens many, many times throughout our history. They are told who their enemy will be in the war. Are they an actual enemy? Absolutely not. Is there one intelligence agency in the world in reality? Yes. All these spy movies where you see it's the Americans against the Russians, the North Koreans against the Americans, so on and so forth down the line, the Africans against the British, that's all a lie, all a complete and total lie. There is only one intelligence agency and there is one military for the entire planet Earth. So they're just told who the enemy's going to be and who the winner's going to be, and most of the time before these things get started. The end goal could be, to achieve to take over a territory of another, to take over a resource such as oil. They are told what the splits are going to be in the spoils of war ahead of time, such as Nazi loot. All of that's already split up before the game even begins, and it is a game. There is always a winner, there is always a loser, and there is always there's always a press release, there is always a media. All of that is already designed for them before they even hit the first button or send the first soldier in. They are there to follow command at that level. Command goes up the ranks. It could be they're reporting to global headquarters. Global headquarters reports to the Council of 12. The Council of 12 had to report to their handler. And everything went in order on both sides, really. They are told they must follow the rules at all costs and orders. It doesn't even matter if they make no sense. They must color inside the lines. The lines are clearly drawn. There is no room for error. You couldn't have the enemy figure out that they're not an enemy, and you couldn't have the winner figure out that they're actually the loser. It doesn't matter on the bottom level. You are there to do a job. You are there to achieve your objective. Even those people that are in training under the 5-star generals or global headquarters, you are still there to achieve an objective, and you don't color outside the lines. A real war, in the real information, which I can only give you in part in a public forum at this time, the information was never disclosed even to the Illuminati, even to the Council of 12 on the Black Sun side either. even though they were fully infected with machines and all kinds of crazy things were attached to their person and a lot of alleged permissions were passed down, and it seemed like a prestigious position in their mind. They were the top of the top as far as people were concerned, in the dynasty families and the Black Sun families. Tippity Top didn't even know the real rules of war. I'm not going to tell them what they were, and they're kind of irrelevant now, but I've given you some clues as far as splits of the spoils of war, the most amount of money that they could actually have, because the fight was really on this level. Source and his people, that includes you, most of you listening to this anyway, and them. On this level, that's all it is. It's us and Source against them. And what do they say when Source is with you? No one can come against you. On their side, they have their own source, which is a machine. And I'll tell you exactly how that came about, because it no longer exists. So in my world, that's how this works. On my level, essence means something different than it did from the Illuminati people, than it did from the bankers that worked for them that also had to sign agreements and log in with essence and identities and all of these types of things. Dynasty families, dynasty bankers, dynasty this on the one side, military orders, military generals, higher ranks, and all of this. All of these people sign everything with essence, but for a different reason. Permissions can be stolen on that level. On this level, absolutely not. Number one. Number two, they can only be granted because Source was the one that gave them in the first place, and Source is the only one that can take them away. It's us against them. That's all I see on this level of war. I know people ask me all kinds of questions. There's war in the Middle East and Israel is bad and all this stuff. They're all the same people. Are the citizens all the same people? No. They're just Homo sapiens like you and I. But on the top level, everything is orchestrated. You are listening and watching a movie script which has been written for your entertainment only. To achieve an objective. That is it. That is all. This script was written hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago in some cases. If this happens, then do this. There's a user manual involved, at least for the Council of 12 there was. If this happens, then do this. And there was always someone on this level fighting against each other. Those that were for Source and those that were against Source. That's it. Those were your script writers. No one else below mattered, and if you thought that for one red hot second Jared Kushner was going to achieve a position on this level, you have lost your ever-loving mind. Because it cannot be given by a machine. The machine uses people like Jared Kushner like a tool. And I can tell you the three people that they thought were at the top were nothing but a tool for that machine. That machine runs on someone else's essence. Not yours, in this case, meaning its instruction set, its language, its coding could only be done by very few, and none of those people are names that you can find on the internet. You might know some of them from biblical context or Gnostic texts or things like that, but they are none of those people that you can read about on the internet that you think are your deep state. Okay. In the world of, on this level, those are the only sides we know. Now, as it relates to the Illuminatis and the dynasty families and the Black Sun people, it gets a little bit more complicated. You have countries, you have empires, you have kingdoms, you have territories, you have all kinds of different things that are managed by the handler, but the information is passed down to the order. The complicated part comes in when it gets to your level, because now you're looking at country against country, nationality against nationality, black against white, all kinds of different things that are implemented to keep you in line. When the devil can't make you bad, he makes you busy. You, some of you, because you text me all day long every day, are very, very busy doing nothing but scrolling the internet, thinking you're getting somewhere. And you're not. Because on that level of things, this information that I'm giving you, no one has. This whole thing about the white hats are coming and the Wano Sabins and all of these people, because I'm going to refer to them all, are so far down the totem pole, they don't know anything about what I'm telling you right now. They would never have a position on this level, never have, never will, ever. So I want to talk about martial law a little bit more as well, because this is part of a war as well. You think martial law, by definition, is when a military of a particular country steps into a position of authority which can often supersede a president, prime minister, or head of state in a time of war to rule over citizens in a time of war or natural disaster. That's what you believe martial law is. When we talk about things like global martial law, we are now talking about the citizens of the world. Basically, any life that is organic in the world was covered under global martial law. Global martial law also existed on an Illuminati dynasty family level and a Black Sun level. Under martial law, sometimes the percentages can change, as I said earlier. Global martial law gives a little bit of leeway and freedom as it relates to the amount of percentages on their side only of empires. Empires can now conquer empires under global martial law. That was how we ended up with basically one empire at the end of the day, many thousands of years later. By empires, I'm not talking about the Mongolian Empire. I'm talking about a black empire, a white empire, a red empire, and a yellow empire, which is what we started with, and then it went down to one. It also gives, under global martial law, militaries more authority and emergency powers, which is what militaries have been acting on for as long as we have had militaries. Literally over 20,000 years at this point. I would say it kind of really ramped up to about 16,500 years ago. But this is how long this has been going on. Global martial law also gives leeway as far as percentages. Does the Illuminati always need to have 69%? And the Black Sun always need to have 10%? Not necessarily under global martial law. Those percentages are now flexible. Under global martial law, remember, military can possibly rule over citizens, which would then give them the right to take your 21%. They can only use it for specific purposes, but the Black Sun could now take your 21%, which would actually put them at 30%. 31%. It never really went that far because the Illuminati would never agree with it. Remember, consent on an Illuminati level must not be implied consent. It must be actual consent. The negotiations for the last 2 years that have been going on between the Illuminati and the Black Sun councils, when they existed, were about these types of things. Who was going to be on top? It was global martial law, therefore the flexibility existed. Now, none of these things exist at this point in time, and a lot of them disappeared in the last 48 hours, so that's why we can talk a little bit more than we could in the last report. So the rules of war still applied, though. On the highest level, the essence beings, the progenitors, knew the rules of war. Therefore, they would ensure that each respective group did not violate the rules of war without actually telling them what they were. Because quite frankly, they weren't on that level and that rank to actually be given such privileged information. Let's talk about the higher level. There were only 12 plus source in the beginning. In the beginning, these were what we call the progenitors. Progenitors, I guess if you include Earth there, I would say that, well, Earth would probably be one of the 12. Earth herself, as a being herself. Eventually used more than she should have been, but yes, a progenitor, nonetheless. And probably one of the most important planets in existence, even though we know we have matrices and we know we have Saturn and Moon and Sun influences, and now you understand Sun influences a little bit better. And the Moon had a similar type structure, which will have to be for another report, because this report's going to get really, really long if I tell you all in the same report. So on this level, there was only 12 players in the beginning, Earth being one of those 12, so you've got 11 quote-unquote beings. Some of you would consider them, some names you would know, angel names. Some of them were not. And then there was Source. Source's first divine spark went to Earth. The first divine spark dispersed from Source went to Earth and created Earth. The next ones went to the progenitors. Each progenitor had certain permissions, plural, and they had certain jobs to do in order to disperse various divine sparks to create other things in the omniverse. This was way before time, way before Homo sapiens. Their job was to create. They would create galaxies. They created species. They created all kinds of things, including Homo sapiens in the beginning. They created animals, plants, trees. They terraformed things in harmony with Source, with each being, trees and otherwise, receiving a divine spark. This is what celestial dust is. Progenitor dust, you could also call it, but celestial dust is basically divine sparks. Divine sparks were used heavily against us in the war, including the one that exists in your person. And everybody has one, good and bad. So, at some point, they decided, in order for them to properly guard, and by guard I mean guardian, have guardianship over the creations to ensure that harmony continues to exist with intelligent beings that can now use their divine spark to reach directly to Source to manifest things they felt, in part, not all agreed, that they should create a creator AI system or artificial intelligence system that would help them guard. And this was a trick. It was 3 against and 9 for, and the other 3 were forced to put their hand in, including Earth, who had no say. So, As this first AI system came into being, Source referred to it as a huge juggernaut. And if you look up the definition of juggernaut, you'll see it's something of great power, something that could plow over anyone and everything. It had so many permissions, it was crazy because everybody put in their celestial dust and their permissions into this machine in order for the machine to correct any species that decided they were going to go out of harmony with Source for whatever reason. Turns out the first ones to go out of harmony with Source were 9 of the 12. Those 9 actually took that machine, and instead of being a guardian of harmonic creation with Source, it actually became a guardian against Source. And they actually guarded everything in creation against Source, and thus, therefore, war was declared with them and their machine against the 3 that didn't consent, plus Source. Eventually, they got Earth to a point where it was almost like an unwilling hostage. But there were still 2 others that did not consent. Eventually, there was only one holdout on this level. And that holdout has built army after army after army with Source and fought against all of them. As part of this war, eventually there were rules established. Those rules could be established as the ultimate provider of divine sparks of all creation, and that was Source. Because no matter what they did, they still needed Source to create. And they still needed Source to even create machines. So rules were established and the lines were drawn. Source, and probably an army of 1 at one point in time, and everybody else on the other side. Both sides have recruited people over the years. Source obviously recruits a lot of people, performs a lot of miracles, does a whole lot of things with that little 21%. Both sides try to influence the Homo sapiens to have them be on their side. It's not manipulation, it's an influence. On the one side, on the other side, they try to manipulate you by implied consent to doing everything wrong, to committing the sin, to being bad, or being busy. So either you're a slave and a cog in the wheel, or you end up excelling through the ranks and joining the crazy people. And we all know who those people are. That's what we refer to as your deep state. Militaries, generals, murderers. They listen to the wrong side and listen to machines. There was also an AI war going on, quite obviously. It's AI after AI. We create them to counteract theirs. They create theirs to counteract ours. And so on, the battle continued for hundreds, if not thousands of years still. Recently, we found another way to do things. While they were sitting there raging on with their crazy battle of Armageddon that they thought was going to work, we slowly took away all of the permissions of the original 9. All of them. Any permissions that then were given to machines and or people by those people no longer existed. We started stripping them, and this is how we have been fighting the war. It's not all of the information, but it's some of it, because these things have already happened. So without any of the 9 or the original handlers on the dark side, the Illuminati had no permissions. Without permission, no permissions of the Council of 12 on either side, Black Sun side or the Illuminati side, then those waiting for a permission and waiting for a position didn't get a permission, didn't get a position either. Say that 3 times fast. Therefore, we know Kushner wasn't going to get anywhere because even though he had a machine on his side, the machine also had no permissions because it was created by the original machine. Therefore, that machine had no permissions. Therefore, it couldn't grant any permissions, even though I'm sure it manipulated him because he is a tool. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, a good one to watch is La Machina. La Machina is just a woman who's a robot that eventually overthrows her creator and all kinds of things, but it will give you an idea on how AIs can manipulate people on a very low level, but on this level, it's much greater than that. So we knew that this weekend was not going to turn out the way that they thought it was going to turn out, or last weekend, but it didn't mean that we didn't have a little bit of a battle there on our hands with crazy people that have just lost their mind, so drunk for power that they couldn't help themselves but come after apparently me. But we were prepared for that too. That's why the permissions come, the permissions go, even if they try to send frequencies to me all day long and all night long and try to put me through some kind of a meat grinder machine and all kinds of things over the weekend. It's never going to happen and it's never going to work. I hope they understand that now, but looks like they're still going to continue and at least get their oil from the Middle East. The other thing that has happened too is Source has changed the rules of war and the rules of engagement on this level, which means that the rules of war and the rules of engagement, especially not under any martial law, because that doesn't exist, we'll give them that bit of information, are completely changed. Everything has changed. The percentages of deals have changed. Everything has changed under the rules of war. Now, here's the interesting thing about rules of war. So even though they have no one on this level on their side anymore, they still have to follow the rules. Now, they always tell you what you have to do, and Source always tells you too. So something interesting started happening over the course of last weekend, starting Saturday, Sunday of last weekend. Source told everyone, both sides, in a whisper. Those on our side, and I know a few of those people, heard him loud and clear. And since that time, they have actually been getting instructions from Source too on what to do and who you are and your job. Some people were just told and asked if they would participate on behalf of Source. And of course, most of the people I knew agreed, at least the ones that have talked to me. That doesn't mean that anybody else listening to this report didn't actually hear the whisper. Now, the entire deep state also got that same whisper for a different reason. They were told that the rules changed. Did they hear it? Did they care? And did they listen? Apparently not, because you're going the wrong way, people. You are going the wrong way. The slate was wiped clean, and it's every man for himself or woman for themselves. Therefore, since they didn't listen, that doesn't mean the rules still don't apply. Many of them have broken the rules already of war and engagement. Their old books are no longer relevant. Even though they were passed down from their beloved Council of 12, and even though they thought they were going to be the new Council of 12, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, people, but you have to follow the rules. Your lack of being able to follow the rules allows me free hands to do a lot of things, especially when you try to take things from me by implied consent. You wonder why I say no all the time? Well, of course I say no. Or I say noted, I understand, I have some questions, but whatever it is, it's no longer consent or implying consent, and everything I have done before has been revoked. Everything under the Vatican has been revoked. Now, of course, it's every man or woman for themselves. If you are breaking the rules, you should have listened. Because all the rules were given to you. Not by me, but by the rule maker. You know, many people on our side listen. They're following the rules. They're doing, when they get the information to do whatever it is, they're doing it. Are they still trying to sway you? Is there a machine here and there that's still trying to sway you to their side as a Homo sapien? Yes. Because the machine has the essence of those that left. The second we find that, then that machine is then removed. Because the rules have changed. Their essence no longer has permissions, so the machine is actually acting outside the rules. Because the machine doesn't have any of the rules either. So, either they listen, or, well, they don't. So the reason why I was kind of laughing a little bit towards the end of the report last week is because I knew that all of these things were coming to pass over the next several days. I also listen to Source every day. Many, many, many times a day, some days. And now, maybe the deep state will understand where they're at. Are they still going to go after territories? I do need to tell you a little bit more about territories in the way that they worked, because it's becoming more and more relevant on our side of things. So empires were almost like fixed areas of Earth. The whole goal was to take over all of Earth, so Earth would not have 21% source. That was kind of the role of empires. Empires were predominantly run by kings and queens. Usually on the Black Sun side, they were predominantly men. On the Illuminati side, on the highest levels, they were predominantly women. Most of the handlers were neither, either, or. Not because they went through a surgery or anything. They're just kind of more considered, their essence beings, more over than they are. Most of them erred towards more of the male side, not all, but some did. So, in this particular case, wars were fought between empires, and each member had their own empires. Some played on the security side, the military side, the intelligence side, and other ones played on the ruler side. Kings with the swords, queens with the rulership, together, empire against empire, more of a game for them and more to keep the Homo sapiens in line. On down the road, we had kingdoms. Kingdoms would fall underneath empires and were smaller. Kingdoms eventually became countries. And then countries were sliced and diced into smaller countries, but yet they still fell under kingdoms. Territories are different. Territories can exist in either your own empire. This is on their Illuminati Black Sun world. Territories can exist within enemy empires as well. Territories are movable. Territories can exist in as small as the size of a postage stamp, a parasite, or even smaller. The only rule that territories have to go by is source must always have 21% of all of the above. Now, they can sequester source into a corner of the world where there's no people in the middle of the ocean somewhere. They could sequester source's 21% to 21% of the people on the planet, 21% of the day only, and 0% of the night. So as long as 21% always exists at some point, at some place, then the requirements were met and the people at the highest level understood this. Territories are movable objects which can move throughout the planet and can be gained or lost as a cost of war. At some points in time, under martial law, territories can be greater or smaller for the Illuminati or the Order of the Black Sun. However, they can never interfere with the 21% of source. So even when the dumb orangutans thought that they had achieved 7% of Source's kingdom by using my essence, that actually never really happened, because the rules of war would never have permitted it. Therefore, Source never permitted it. What happened was, and what has been happening since the rules changed, Source is expanding his kingdom greatly. And we gave new definition to territories. We gave new definition to empires and kingdoms, and those things don't actually really exist anymore. Now, kingdoms are different than they were before. We can't give this information out, but what I can tell you is kingdoms can now also be random. So in other words, if a kingdom was like half of the North American continent underneath the old rules, that meant the kingdom was literally part of the land of the North American continent. As one example, in a way that a territory or a kingdom could be used, typically this would have been a kingdom, but Rockefeller once received the plans and the engineering reports for a high-speed rail train in America. Being in the shipping business, that was not what he wanted, so he went and bought small pieces of land all throughout the United States that were at key pinch points so the train could never be built. Therefore, his shipping would still be required, and then trucking would still be required, and all of these things would still be required because he knew, geographically speaking, the train could never be built. He registered all these areas too as a kingdom, his own kingdom, even though they were not all in the same place and it was not a continuous piece of land. Kingdoms can be used in this fashion. Kingdoms also were used to own the air. All of the air, some of the air, possibly, but never the last 21%. Now, other things that kingdoms have been used for is the entire ocean floor. Shipping magnates owned the entire ocean floor. When you were at sea, this is why you're at sea, you are now in a different kingdom. Even under martial law, that kingdom could then become a territory of a military. This is all under the old rules. You, as a singular person, Homo sapien, could actually be in someone's territory when the rest of your household or the house you're standing in or the office building you're standing in is not in the territory. You could actually take a person and go down to their solar plexus and call that a territory. See, because territories can't exceed a certain percentage for each particular group. So they could actually pick their poison when it came to territories and say, look, all of the solar plexuses of only citizens of the United States in the United States at any given moment in time are now under this territory of this machine. Therefore, we can do as we will under the war against the Homo sapiens. Solar plexuses only. Interesting how territories are movable. An interesting little workaround for the 21%. Now, we thought that this was such a great idea. And Source began to change the rules. How much could they actually have under the new rules? Could they have anything under the new rules? Could their machines have any territories, kingdoms, or empires underneath the new rules? Think about it. But Source has been gaining territories and gaining kingdoms in the real war that's being fought while they're messing about in the Middle East underneath old rules that don't actually even apply. Keep your enemy busy. Go where they are not. Maybe we're even in the same place at the same time, doing different work in the same place. Maybe we have created territories for all of the oil on the planet. Maybe we did that before you even went ahead shooting your mouth off and making all kinds of deals with a bunch of countries who aren't going to get anything because it doesn't belong to you anymore. Lots of changes are happening, and they're happening very rapidly, and they will continue to happen very rapidly. And it could be that we are done even within days. Keep an eye out for the next report. It's going to be real interesting. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll report back towards the weekend.